where to go with a project that's kind of simple and elegant. Do we embellish the top with lots of decoupage? Do we marble the top? There's a few ideas that have been kicking around in my mind, but I kind of want to keep this simple. But you know me, it won't be simple. It will have lots of things going on, even though it is a small table. So let's take a closer look at the project. As always, with most projects, I spend a little time to get to know the piece of furniture before I paint over any original finishes. And with this table, although it looks like a wonderful fine antique, I truly know that this has been made in the last 20 to 30 years, and probably not even on our shores in the UK. This is imitating something that looks like a British antique. And the reason I know this is the wood is most definitely not mahogany. It's some other wood, probably something like mango wood. I'm not quite sure. But in the details, these carved details, it's really rough. I can almost feel the grain of the wood stood up. And it also has a thick, dark varnish over the surface area. So it is quite crudely made. So I'm very comfortable with painting over this. What I want to achieve is an antique that looks like it was painted many years ago, with lots of layers and chippy and all that exciting stuff that we all love about painted furniture. I'm not going to embellish this surface of this top with any decoupage or any other embellishment. I just think it needs to stay quite simple in a painterly way. One thing that I have flagged up that I'm not keen on at all is between the two carved details here and here, there's this very flat, dead space, almost as if something's been chopped away. It hasn't. This is how it was made originally, but I feel like it needs some more embellishment. Now, I have considered maybe adding a small wood U-bend to the middle for a little bit more carved detail, but I've come up with another concept which I think will add a little bit more dimension, and that is to add just a simple brass knob underneath, and I think this will really add that sort of three-dimensional finish. So if you can see from on the camera, a little bit far away, I think that's circular in the middle of that carved detail. So there's also, this repeats on the other side here. So I'm thinking just in between each of those curlicues, we'll add this brass knob, and then we'll get stuck in with a base coat, something quite neutral. Again, I haven't quite decided how I'm going to create this finished look, so you're going to have to bear with me, and I'm probably going to throw everything at this but the kitchen sink, just to get the overall finish of an elegant piece of furniture that has had years and years and years of paint with lots of things going on. So it should look quite beautiful in the end. So I'm really happy with the way that the little knobs have turned out. They look really good, nice and secure. So first coat, the canvas coat, I'm going to go with something quite neutral. I've decided to go with French linen. I think this will be a really good base coat to then start applying other tones. The overall piece, I want it to kind of look quite grey, but with hints of brown and maybe a touch of blue in there and a little bit of white. That's the colour palette that I'm thinking. So the first coat is just literally a canvas coat. I'm going to use a small Annie Sloan oval brush any what way. I'm not worrying about the way that I apply the paint. I'm also not cleaning the piece. Any of the dirt and grime that goes into this, I'm quite happy for that to happen. It's going to look really, really old and distressed by the end of the whole process. Whilst I'm waiting for my French linen to dry, this is what I would call a canvas coat. You may have heard me refer to canvas coat in other tutorials. Now, the reason I call it the canvas coat is it's a little bit like an artist who preps the canvas before the artwork goes on the top. Also, this is a good time to start looking at your furniture piece with a new set of eyes. Now, this has really helped me. The French linen has really helped me choose the way that I want to go with this project. I really love this colour, and if I gave it another coat of paint, it would be good for wax as is, but we want to create lots of texture, chippiness, age and patina over the surface. So I am going to move to a dark colour on my next stage. So I'm going to use on Fleur, maybe a touch of Aubusson blue, just to add some depth and darkness. We will end up probably with a French linen sort of colour over the whole piece, but I want to add some chippiness over the top of this surface before we go for the French linen. So a little longer to dry, another 10 minutes, and this should be good to go before we start moving on to adding those dark colours. So I'm now day 2 of my project. Normally I would have moved a little bit further forward, but I got waylaid with a few phone calls. So I've stepped away from this paintwork, which I'm really happy with. There's a little bit of cracking, there's a bit of texture, I can feel it's rough. Build up of paint on the edges, which is what I wanted for the next part of the process. But I have changed tack a little bit on where I was going to go with, and I think that's because I stepped away for such a long time. I've been thinking about the project and the next step. So what I was originally going to do at this stage was go back in with the French linen and apply it quite thickly as we did these layers of paint, and then heat it up with a hairdryer and tickle over with the brush as the paint has just formed a light skin on the surface. A little bit like custard, you get a skin, and just knock it back with the brush, which would have created little lumpy bumpy bits, textural sort of anomalies on the surface, which would have allowed me to scrape away the paint once fully dried. Are you still with me, guys? It would have allowed me to scrape away to the undercolour, which would have revealed some of these shades. But I've had a little time to think about it, and I want to add another body or thickness of paint and some crackle and areas that I can chip away at. So I've decided to go with a technique that I've used before. Some of you may have seen it, and I will link it into the description box below, so if you want to watch that tutorial you can. I'm going to go in with Annie Sloan Crackle. Now I've got to take a little bit of time to explain these if you've not used them. There's 2 parts to this, step 1 and step 2. Crackle is the manufacturer instructions, Annie's instructions to these products is it's kind of a finishing product. It will sit over the top of when you've completely finished all of your paintwork. Step 1 goes on and it's a little bit like a varnish. It's kind of shiny. You apply that to the areas you want to crack. Step 2 is a little bit more like a Vaseline. It's quite thick, and you apply that in a thick, thin way over the top of the varnished areas, step 1. And with a little bit of heat, it will craze. It'll craze and crack. And then when you go in with your clear wax and dark wax, the dark wax will sit into the cracks. It's great for over decoupage. It looks wonderful. So you'll get the fine hairline craze and cracks. So I'm going to take it to a different way. I'm going to add, and I've done this before and it works lovely. I'm going to add step 1 as is, as the manufacturer instructions. We're going to apply this to the edges, anywhere that I want some sort of anomaly, cracking, build-up of paint. So whilst I'm waiting for step 1 to thoroughly dry, it will go opaque and clear, see-through, when it's ready to go for the next layer, whichever way that you're using it. But it's leaving me time to think even more, and I want to add something else into this project, which is either going to work or it won't work. It's all an experiment. You're joining me on the process of this project, and that is to add some gold. Now, it's not normally something that I use too often, and I think when you use gold, you would always kind of apply it at the end of the project, but I want this gold to sit somewhere embedded into the years and age of this piece. So it's either going to work, it might be a hot mess, but another product won't hurt. It's just going to add those layers. I'm going to go in with Posh Chalk pigment. I've got here, what colour is this? Pale gold, which I have mixed with a little bit of Byzantine gold. If you're not familiar with Posh Chalk products, it's a powder, and then you use their infuser. This is the product that I like to use, the decoupage paper, to apply it and top coat it. So it's a dual purpose product. So a little bit of powder, a little bit of a Posh Chalk infuser mixed together, and this is the outcome, gold. So I'm going to add this on some of the detailed areas, maybe around the filigree areas, the little knob that we added, on some of this acanthus leaf that that's on the knees of this table, and I'm going to add it in a random fashion, just glimmers of it. It may act as a resist when we put the French linen over the top. I have no idea. We may not see the gold ever again, but at least you're having fun watching me apply a bit of gold. Okay, so I think I know what you're all thinking at this stage. That looks really beautiful. I actually really love the gold with these two colours. It will be for another project. Aubusson blue, Enfleur and gold all together. I think that's just a gorgeous combination. But that's not the trajectory of what I planned for this project. And if it was, I might have gone a little bit neater with the gold, but I haven't. It's loose because it's going to sit somewhere deep beneath, I hope, fingers crossed. So let's move back to the French linen and adding step 2 of the crackle to the product. Now it's as simple as what you can imagine. I'm going to work in small sections. So we're going to do the top surface first, and then I'll work down the legs later on. And I may need to mix more of this up as I go along, because it does take quite a lot of paint. So in with a little bit of French linen into a bowl, straight into a bowl, and that should see us right for at least the top. And I've got my step 2 crackler, and this is really not so looking good in the can, and that's because I've done this with this project before and I didn't I just kept on going in with paint. So please don't do that. Decant and then enter into your other projects. But I'm quite happy with adding all of the lumps and texture in there. So 1 spoonful of French linen, and I'm going to mix it into, not French linen, step 2, mixing it into the paint. It may need another, I'll know, because you'll feel it. It literally goes from thick to much thinner. Right, I have a feeling it just needs a little bit more. Let's clean the spoon. So that's probably 1.5 teaspoons to that much paint. just incorporate it in. I will use my brush in a moment just to give that, yeah, it's slightly loosening the product, the paint. Can you see? If you know Annie's paint, it's normally quite thick, but can you see the looseness of that paint now? That'll indicate that you've got enough of step 2 in that paint. The other thing that I've got to use is I'm using an actual, this is a Klingon brush, and the reason I'm using this brush is because the bristles are not as bristly as a natural hairbrush. Bristly, does that make sense? It will just allow me to glide the paint on. I will kind of go any what way again, and hopefully we'll get some cracking when we hit it with the hairdryer. Okay, so I know that you're probably thinking, this does not make any sense. We're right back to where we started with the canvas coat, back to French linen. All of that lovely work that we did has gone, but it's not in vain. We are going to be distressing at this stage. Now, you could pick away with a blade and scrape back the edges, but what I'm going to do with this is use a wet distress technique to remove paint from where I want it to be, and also it can be a colour wash to go into some of these details. So I'm going to go with a lighter shade. I'm going to go with one of the whites, in this case Annie Sloan Original. I'm going to mix up about, I would say about 50% paint to 50% water, and we're going to saturate the whole piece with that colour wash all over, all in one go, everything that we can, making sure that we get into all of the detailed areas. And as that wet paint or colour wash, whatever you want to call it, it will seep into all of the anomalies that we've created, the little cracks that we've created, any of the textural paint, and it will just start breaking away the French linen. And it means that we can take a wet cloth and a dry cloth to slowly start distressing and revealing some of those undercolours. In theory, remember, everything's going at this but the kitchen sink. Wish me luck. I'm pretty sure that it will do something really lovely. So let's start mixing a colour wash. A couple of the things that I'll be using when I'm doing my wet distressing technique is cotton cloth. This is old bedding which I've torn into squares, one of which is going into a bucket of water, and that one will be a wet cloth. The other two that I've got here, and you may need more, are going to be dry. This is like an abrasive, so if we need to remove a bit more paint, the dry cloth will really help with that. Obviously the colour wash, and then just go for it. Use your paintbrush. Again, I'm using a soft paintbrush to cover the whole surface area and allow it just to penetrate for a little while. So you do need to work quite quickly, but don't worry too much. If it's a bigger piece of furniture, just go for it, but do not allow it to dry out. Another thing that might be useful to have on hand, so you don't allow it to dry out, is a atomizer with some water in that as well. So if you can see the chalk paint wash drying out, give it a mist. Keep it open, keep the water open, so then you can really work your magic with your distressing technique. Okay guys, I thought I would give you a little bit of a running commentary on what's happening on screen as it's a sped up video. So obviously you can see me applying the colour wash. Now this is a messy job, so make sure you cover your surface areas, and also make sure you push your colour wash into any finer detail. For instance, on this piece, I'm making sure to hit all of the carved details, just slightly working in that colour wash. And it does need time to penetrate the surface of that top layer of paint. You can also see I'm just adding a little bit of water with the atomizer, and then taking my very wet cloth, which I've wrung out, and balling it up into kind of a flower shape, and then patting the surface of the colour wash, which adds lovely textures and patination, and it's really just to get a feel of how the paint might slip away. So I do this with the wet cloth, and then I'll move on to a dry cloth, and if the paint's not shifting as well as I'd like, I will go back and add another colour wash or a little bit more water. It's just a feel thing. Eventually, if you're gentle with your cloth, you'll slowly start seeing areas of the paint removing from the higher ground, the edges. So as you can see, I've gone back in with more colour wash just because I felt like it hadn't penetrated the top surface of the paint. It needed a little bit more moisture and paint, and back in with that soft rag again, patting it in a little bit like rag rolling, almost adding lovely patination to that surface of the furniture piece. So here is something unusual that maybe I've not mentioned in other videos. I've got a wooden paintbrush in hand. I'm holding the bristle end, and I'm just tapping around the edges. Now what this does, it kind of bruises the edge of the paint. So when I go back in with my soft dry cloth, it kind of breaks into that surface, and it allows it just to chip away quite naturally. Another technique that you could use is a palette knife, just to kind of scrape away on the edges. But to be honest, the best tool in the toolbox for me is the end of my thumbnail. And I know that's not very nice if you've got pretty nails, but for me it really, really helps just to scrape away a little bit of paint on the edges. Or you could use the end of the brush, and you'll see me doing that in a moment. I'm using the end of the brush just to slightly scrape the edge of the paint, and then going back in with the cloth just to soften that bruise that we're making. Here's a more detailed shot of that actually happening. And that's how I proceed over the whole piece until I'm happy. If you take a little bit too much paint away, of course you can go back in with the French linen, just stipple it back in and cover up any areas that you're not too sure of. But I was pretty happy with the way that this came off. In its entirety, it looked really, really pretty. So I'm gonna leave you to watch the end of how this came together, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So I'm just about at the final hurdle of this project, and that is to give it a clear coat of wax to reveal all of that beautiful patina that we've created. I've picked and chipped away at all of the edges as it was drying to reveal some of the gold, the Aubusson blue, a little bit of even the natural wood from right beneath. The body of material that we applied in the crackler step 1 and step 2 has really helped that happen, but I do have a huge confession to make. My own technique, and I missed a whole step from it. I was really wondering, why am I not getting extreme cracking? And that's because I didn't add another layer of step 2. Reel back, Jonathan. So after you apply step 1, you leave that to dry, and then you add step 2 into the paint, and then you go back and add a touch more step 2 to the surface of your project, then paint over. How on earth did I forget to do that? I wondered as I was drying it, this is not cracking, and you'll all think I'm a great failure. It happens to the best of us. Nevertheless, we've got to this stage. It's been a process of learning along the way for me. One thing that I've absolutely loved about this project is using the Posh Chalk gold pigments underneath wet distressing. It really does slide away nice and easy when removing. So that is an awesome technique that I will be using in the future, but I'm pretty happy with it. It has been kind of a long-winded process. Had I done that one little thing to create the cracks, it could have been a very different project, but I'm happy with it. It's not about the process, it's the end results, I suppose. So let's get stuck in with a little bit of clear wax, see how it looks. I may tickle it with a bit of dark wax, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm happy. It's gonna grace my home with a lovely vase of flowers, and I can't wait to see it in the house.